when you get that millisecond, that yeah, you get that grain size up like super short, man, it really starts doing some really fun stuff. So this is kind of how we created this melody here. Today, I pretty much wanted to go over why I think the drum sampler is a misnomer. It's really just a incredibly powerful suite of effects, not too dissimilar from something like a DJ channel strip, if you will. Let's just go for it.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Ben, and thank you so much for joining us for another Discord Deep Dive. Today's deep dive is focused on Drum Sampler, which is a sampling device that's included in all of the different instruments that we make. You can use Drum Sampler in live, push, note, and move. And we have some awesome presenters for you today. We're going to hear from Rossiter, who's going to give us a little introduction to how Drum Sampler works and create some maybe unexpected ambient music with it. After that, we're going to hear from Omari and see how he twists and transforms Drum Sampler. And at the end, we're going to hear a little bit from Marco Tonni, one of the product owners that's designed Drum Sampler. So let's go ahead and turn things over to Ivy to go ahead and give you an introduction to Drum Sampler.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ben, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to be here. Like Ben said, I am going to give you a bit of an introduction to Drum Sampler. It's a new sampling instrument to live, but the first time that I got to play with it, it was in Move. I'm really delighted that it's in live now because it's a really fun and lightweight device to play with, and there's a lot of really cool sounds that you can get out of it straight away. So just coming over to my live screen over here, you can see that I've already got Drum Sampler loaded up on a track here. You can think of this as a more lightweight version of Simpler. It's got a bunch of very similar controls. You've got our screen where you can drop your sample. You've got controls for your start, your length, your gain. You've got a very simplified ADSR. So you've just got attack, hold, and decay down here. And you've got some transposition, detune, and of course you've got your familiar trigger mode down the bottom here. On the right hand side, we've got volume, panning, the velocity to volume control here. I'm going to be playing a little bit with this later because you can use it in some unexpected ways. And then you've got your modulation panel. This is where I think Drum Sampler is really shines. I'm going to be using this a lot later on. Coming across to the left, we've got a filter panel. You've got high pass and low pass filters, plus you've got a band pass. And when you use the band pass mode, you get a gain knob here, but in all of the other modes, you've got your usual resonance control and your frequency control for the filter. And then here you've got a bunch of inbuilt effects. There's 9 different effects that you can use in Drum Sampler. We're going to be exploring a few of them today. They are just a really fast and easy way to start manipulating your sounds. And the 2 encoders down here will change depending on what effect you've got activated. Your effects and your filter panels can just be toggled on and off. Really simple if you just want to use it purely as a basic sampler, but then again, like I say, when you start using the effects, it really comes to life. Now, you might want to be using Drum Sampler as your default sampler whenever you open up a drum rack. You just come down in your devices in the library and come to your user library. And when you go to your defaults, dropping samples, and on drum rack, you can just drop Drum Sampler right in there. And now whenever you drop a sample into drum rack, just automatically it will be loaded up in a Drum Sampler. So what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be looking at kind of a straightforward use case with building a drum rack and manipulating some samples to make them sound a little bit different, build a full drum rack or quite a few different drums out of a couple of very simple samples. And then once I've done that, I'm going to be running you through how to maybe use Drum Sampler in some more creative ways to make some less anticipated sounds, not strictly drum sounds. So I'm just going to load up a drum rack, and I've got a couple of samples that I've already selected for today's run through. So I've just got a very basic snap sound here that I can just drop into a pad, and like that, because I set up Drum Sampler as my default device, it's loaded up a drum sampler with my sample in it. The first thing I'm going to do, as you can hear, this is a very high-pitched snap sound. I'm actually going to turn it into a kick. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to load up the sub-oscillator effect in the effects panel. And I'm just going to create a 4-to-the-floor kick pattern just to have this running as I manipulate the sample. Now, I can either turn up the amount of sub-oscillator using this encoder here and adjust the frequency like this, or I can just use the XY to pull it around and find a pitch that I like. I can filter off some of those high frequencies using my filter, maybe give it a little bit of resonance to give a little bit of punch in those mids, and I can adjust my decay to make it either a bit of more of a boomy kick or have it be a little bit tighter and punchier. So just very quickly, from a very basic sound, I've quickly made a rough kick sound. So I'm going to take that same sample, and this time I'm going to create a snare. This time I'm going to be using the noise effect. Noise just very quickly adds some noise to the sample. Let's add a couple of snare hits. Very quickly, we've got something that's sounding a little bit like a snare. Let's give us a little bit more color in those mids. There we go. I'm going to filter out some of the low end. Maybe give us a little bit of resonance. And straight away, kick, snare, good to go. Let's add some hi-hats. Again, same sample. This time I am going to start off by making some 16th notes. There we go. I'm going to drop my hold down a little bit to give me a bit of a snappy sound. And once again, I'm going to be using the noise to bring up some more of those high ends. I'm going to bring up my transposition a bit to give me a bit more high end. There we go. Now, I'm going to start using some of the modulation functions in Drum Sampler because this is really, like I said, where the device really starts to shine. Down here in our modulation section, we've got the choice to modulate either using the velocity information in our clip or using the slide information in our clip. I'm going to be using the slide information a little bit later on, especially when I start using the push to make music. But for now, we're just going to stick with velocity. There's a few different ways that you can add some velocity information to your clip. I really love using the random velocity, which you can add to your MIDI clip by holding Command and dragging your velocity control. You can add basically some randomization into the velocity of your MIDI clip. And what this means is that when the velocity changes, I can decide what different parameter within the drum sampler is going to be changed by a change in velocity. At the moment, the velocity is being sent to the filter, but what I want to do is send it to the hold length so that we're getting some slight variations in the length of those hi-hats, basically like the opening and closing of the hi-hat. So I'm going to come to my drop-down menu and turn on hold, and we can adjust this either negative or positive values. Let's just go plus 100%. And so that we're not getting confused about whether or not we're just hearing volume difference or whether we're actually hearing a difference in that hold length, I'm going to turn down the velocity to volume. So those hi-hats are going to be always the same volume, but they're going to sound different because of the variety in the hold length. So I can adjust that until it's starting to sound a little bit more natural, and I am going to add a little bit of that difference in the volume of my hits as well, just to give it a little bit more of a human feel. And so very quickly, I've just taken that one snap sound and turned it into 3 different quite standard drum sounds, ready to go, which is great. Now I'd like to try making a few more kind of glitchy, strange sounds to add into my drum beat. So I'm just taking the same sample every single time. And this time, I'm once again going to add in a bunch of 16th notes. But I'm going to reduce the chance of all of these 16th notes just so that they're going to be a little bit more random, just popping in and out of the pattern. And this time, I'm going to start playing around with the other more creative effects inside Drum Sampler. I'm going to start playing with the stretch. Now the first thing I'm going to do is turn up the factor of stretch as high as it can be, so we're getting a lot of change. And I'm going to start playing with this XY so you can hear the change in the way this sample sounds. Smaller and smaller slices of that sample getting repeated, or larger and larger slices. And this time, with the velocity modulation, I can adjust, instead of the hold with the hi-hat, I'm going to modulate one of the effects parameters. I'm going to modulate the effects 2, which in this case is grain. Again, turning the factor all the way up, adjusting my velocity for all of these hits, giving us some randomness, and turning that percentage up, and let's see how that sounds. So we can hear that we're getting some really interesting glitchy sounds, and in the context of my beat. So I'm starting to get a little bit of strangeness, a little bit of weirdness in there with my glitchy drums. Let's make one more. This time I'm going to copy this pad over, and we're going to use the loop function on this one. Again, this is another way that you can really get some interesting, strange sounds. Once again, we are going to be adjusting one of the effects parameters. I'm going to put the offset to 0 because we want to start the loop from as soon as possible in the sample. And let's just copy these over once again. So we've got a 52% chance on all of these hits, and we've got a velocity range happening in the MIDI clip. So we can see how that velocity modulation on the length of the loop is going to change things. We've almost got a little bit of a melodic tonality coming into that with those very short loops. So far we've used all percussive sounds. I do want to bring in one sound that has pitch to show what the ring modulation can do. With this one, I am going to make the sample pretty short and adjust the attack so that the sample is starting in with a really fast attack right at the beginning. And let's just add a couple of random notes here. And with the ring modulation, again, I'm going to turn the amount all the way up to the top, and the velocity is going to change the frequency of the ring modulation. Now, I can use another way of adjusting the velocity, which was we have this velocity device that I can drop in before my sample into my drum rack. And I can turn the randomization on this velocity device all the way up. And once again, this is going to add some randomization into the velocity of all of the MIDI notes that are being produced. I'm going to turn the velocity to volume all the way down because I don't want to actually change the volume of the sample. We're just going to see what this randomness does with the ring modulation. There we go. Now it's going where I wanted it to go. We needed to send it to the frequency modulation rather than to the filter. So just like that, I've got some really strange, interesting, fun drum sounds. So this would be a really traditional use case of how you would be using Drum Sampler. The way that I first started using Drum Sampler was actually building an instrument rack for live ambient improvisation on the move. And so I'm going to show you how I made the most of the features in Drum Sampler to do that. So I've actually built a drum rack here out of a series of samples from an omnichord. It was a multi-sample instrument that somebody put for free on the internet, and I don't usually know what to do with one-shot melodic samples. They're not something that I tend to use. And then I found in building this instrument, this was exactly the perfect use case for this. So I've got this instrument here, and I'm just going to switch to showing my push here. So I've got this instrument with a whole bunch of different melodic samples, and I can trigger one. And with each of these sounds, I'm using the slide modulation as a way of adjusting these parameters. So, for example, the loop length, or for a sample that I have on the stretch mode, I'm adjusting the grain modulation with the MPE control functions of the push. So as I bring my finger up on the pad, you can see that the higher I go on the pad, the faster the sample will play back. So that's adjusting the size of the grain. I have a few other things that I've done to build this instrument. I've used the macros to map the filter frequency on pretty much all of the drum pads. So I can adjust the filter frequency on across my entire instrument. I've also mapped half of them to 2 different volume macros so that I can really play with how all of the different samples are sounding. And then I do have one vocal sample here that I have mapped one macro to the start position of this sample so that I can trigger it from different places. So if you don't have a push, or if you don't have an MPE capable MIDI controller, you can still add MPE information in your MIDI clip by coming across to the MPE tab and making sure that you have the slide viewer open in the bottom of your screen. Let's just have slide for now. And you can either draw in with the pencil different slide information, or without the pencil, you can also draw in breakpoints and create curves in your slide information to control the different parameters that you have mapped to your modulator in your rack. And so I'm just going to very quickly show you how this instrument that I've built sounds when I'm performing with it. So that's just a little taster of what I've done here, just things that I'll point out to you that if you're interested in building something like this with the drum rack, the most important functions that you'll want to play around with are your attack, hold, and decay settings. You've got really long hold and decay, so each of my samples are playing back for 20 seconds and then have a decay of 30 seconds. So when you're using those stretch modes and loop modes in the drum sampler, you can basically make extremely long sustained sounds and have them play out for a really, really long time. And then mapping your modulation settings either to the velocity of the way that you are triggering your notes, or to the slide function, especially if you've got an MP capable MIDI controller like the Push. This lets you really play with the glitchiness and the ways in which those sounds are repeating as you play. And so I've taken a bunch of samples that are all pretty much in key with each other, but I also have the ability, when I have the layout of my Push on 16 pitches, I can pitch these samples up and down the scale as well. So it can still be a very flexible melodic instrument, but also because I'm not the best at music theory, I really appreciate being able to see, first of all, that all of the samples that I've chosen, I know that they're in key with each other, and then I can see my scale mode in the 16 pitches here. The ability to obviously map with macros is really powerful. You can create racks and racks of interesting samples, use a lot of the effects to change the nature of those sounds as you go. I haven't covered all of the different effects that there are in Drum Sampler. As you can see, there's also pitch envelope, which does what you would expect. It can add a rising or falling pitch envelope to your sample. Punch, which will reduce the starting transient of your sample, just to leave a little bit more room. 8-bit, who doesn't love a bit crusher? It's great. FM modulation, and then, as I showed you, we've got the ring mod, sub-oscillator, noise, stretch, and loop. So there's a lot of really fun things encapsulated all within this one very lightweight instrument. And then because, of course, it lives with the Ableton ecosystem, note, move, push, you can create something on any of those different platforms and bring it across into your live, into your move, into your push, and yeah, make some really cool things with it. So I really hope that you'll enjoy playing with it. I hope you can find some interesting use cases for whatever music you make. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing. That was fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us. That was super dope presentation, Ivy, too, because there's a lot in there that even I'm still discovering, and there's a lot of use cases. But yeah, today I pretty much wanted to go over why I think the drum sampler is a misnomer. Like the word drum is almost like a red herring in this way, where it's like, it's really just a incredibly powerful suite and platter of effects, not too dissimilar from something like a DJ channel strip, if you will. And Ivy was really going over a lot of live use cases, which I love. And in this one, I think I'm gonna try to maybe highlight how you can use it in automation, like over a timeline. What I wanted to do was just share a couple of tracks with you, and I'll just share this first one, and we'll break down kind of some of my use cases, and then after that we'll share another one and then do the same thing. Mostly I'm using it to get a lot of ear candy, not only ear candy, but yeah, momentary effects, kind of using some generative sort of concepting as well. And it really shines when you just start to bring in one other element. Like, not only on its own is it already super powerful, but like you bring in something like a LFO or expression control, and it immediately just gets more powerful. So I'll play this track for you real fast, and then we'll just get into the kind of separate use cases that I have going on. Let's just go for it. Yep. So there's that. And yeah, just kind of like this sort of bouncy bass, heavy kind of I don't know, IDM tree. I don't know. Genres are I'm not good with genres. They don't really matter. But I will say this is kind of only a couple of elements, and it's mostly the drum sampler doing a lot of the work of some of the more like just trippy aspects of this. So I'll just start with the drums. We'll just kind of go like top down. So with the drums, I'll just solo this out real fast. Right. I just got a kick and a snare. And mind you, just real fast, if you were to pull in a sample like let's see, let me go to my one shots. Let me grab just like a random snare. Mine isn't actually defaulted to the drum sampler yet. And if you need to do that, what you can do is right click up top, like right above like where the name of your sample is, and you can convert that sampler to a drum sampler. So that's really helpful. And then that also is reflective over here in this drum rack. You could right click the drum rack and then it'll change all the cells to the drum sampler. So I know they're going to go over it later about how to set it to default, but if it's not set to default yet, that's just like a quick little shortcut to convert everything. Which, mind you, if you have a bunch of samples, depending on your CPU, like if you got like 64 samples, it might take a little bit of time to convert it. So super snappy when it's just like a couple of samples. Anyway, back to this. I just got two modulations kind of happening here. One is with the pitch envelope on the kick, and then I'm using the loop function on the clap to kind of create like some just momentary effects. I'll show you real quick where the clap is happening. Right? You just kind of get this crazy just flanging, kind of like DMB flange. And it's really cool because it's kind of just working as like almost like a beat repeat, if you will, with the length just like super, super fine, you know, like 10 milliseconds. I usually find myself mapping macros, but when I'm in this arrange mode, you know, sometimes it's just really nice to just have it set up, just modulated right there. So what I did, let's see if I can show the automation. This is really simple automation curve. And then in order to turn that off is at the next hit. I only have it engaged for this one hit. So the rest of these are just dry, right? And then this turns on, and then all the modulations start. But this is what is so cool about this is that when I had the frequency all the way up and like I didn't do any other alterations on volume or anything like that, it was just super loud, you know, and it was just like this moment that it was really cool, but I was like, I just need to be able to dial it in. And I think the strength of drum sampler comes from not really needing to venture to so many other places to dial that sound in or dial that moment in. So the fact that I could come in and automate like quickly a frequency or a filter that was after all my effects was really, really helpful, and volume as well. So those are kind of like just very general sort of use cases. And then yeah, with the kick, I did something similar with like the pitch envelope, just automating the amount. Like I had the decay fixed, I think about 300 milliseconds. And then in certain moments, it's just kind of working as like this, instead of automating this, like the transpose slider, I'm just doing like a quick envelope, just bends it up. And then yeah, you have control over, you know, the fade and all. I think the meat and potatoes of what's happening here too is this bass sound, which you're hearing. I literally went into a sample pack, let's see, and found, this is what was really fun, is that I was like scrolling up and down through the basses just with the arrow keys. And then I kind of started doing a little rhythm, and I was like, oh wait, that's sick. So I just grabbed like 3 or 4 of them, threw them in a drum rack, right? And then converted them to the drum sampler. And then I just played out this rhythm. Right? And I was like, okay, that's really sick, but what else can I get out of that? So what I did was I went into, and I'll actually just recreate this for you real fast. So we go into drum rack, boom. Let's grab these basses again. Yeah, Boom. Right click, drum sampler. And I'm just going to hit this top spiral that like breaks open the macro control page, because this is really where this kind of starts to evolve. I'm going to come over here to where it says factor. I like to have everything on stretch, and I think by default that's like maybe the first mode of the effects. So everything kind of defaults to stretch, and that one is just really powerful to me. Like if you liked the texture tab in Ableton in the clip view at all, this is really going to speak to you, because I feel like there's a lot of automations that kind of feel a little bit baked in, and this is very automatable here. So, and it's live and really nice as a momentary effect or just a sound design tool. So what I'll do is map that to macro 1, and then right click it again, and then hit map to all siblings. So now it's, you know, mapping for each individual cell, which is super, super fun. And then I want to say I did the grain as well and the decay. So same process, map that to macro 2, map to all siblings, map to macro 3, and then map to all siblings, right? And so now when I play these, so yeah, when you get that millisecond, yeah, you get that grain size up like super, super short, man, it really starts, doing some really fun stuff. So this is kind of how we created this melody here, is on this one. You can see it's here. The stretch factor goes all the way up. I actually had the grain size in the same position on this original one. And I just drew like a short, automation line that is just it decreasing the stretch factor, decreasing, right? And so now you've just got like this kind of music concrete, just sound designy type of moment, bass moment, if you will. You're just getting a lot of mileage out of one sound. But yeah, this is really the strength of this, is that it's just so easily mappable, right? So you're coming in to pretty much every control that you see in here is mappable, except I want to say maybe the gain, which makes sense. But yeah, it's just a lot of map to siblings. I think this is kind of a lot of the mileage that I get out of it is mapping multiple macros. But even though you can kind of go in cell by cell and create all these discrete mappings, you can really get funky with this too, because that you can map pretty much everything. You could right click the mode itself and then hit map to macro 4 and literally switch through the effects types, right? And also map that to the siblings. So now this will switch through the effects type for every single sample. And what's so cool about that is now you have a crazy momentary effect suite. Like if you really like to get, crazy with automation, you can just pretty much use just the drum sampler to create all these cool transition effects and alterations on your sound. So before I move on, I want to show one more use case. There's this kind of percussion loop happening down here that you can hear. It's kind of a little noisy and just like at a weird frequency. And the way that I got that is I dragged in this break. So this was a really fun workflow for me to figure out, is that I just create an audio track and I dragged this sample in. I was like, all right, I got a break. That's what it sounded like before I chopped anything, and it didn't sound great. And I was like, okay, let me do something to it. And I right click that and then just hit slice to new MIDI. And I I've actually set up my own blank slicing template so that it doesn't map anything for me. So now I actually, whenever I slice something, there's no preset mappings. I can just go in there and just do them all from scratch. Right, so let's just say we convert that again to the drum sampler, and then it spat out this MIDI, right? Actually, I've already chopped this before, so I'm going to use this other break. So I'll reverse engineer this for you. What I did was I changed the effect suite to FM, again, hit copy value to siblings, and that brought it to every cell. Because before that, I think it just defaults to stretch whenever you pull in a drum sampler. So you just got to make sure anytime you want it to affect every single cell, you right click and hit copy value to sibling so that you just get that kind of global alteration, right? And then on this, I mapped the FM frequency and then the FM amount as well. And then what you do is you group that. So Command G if you're on Mac, right? And then I mapped that, the FM amount and the FM frequency, to the macro on the group. So it's like this nested macro, essentially, that is now controlling both of these guys, which is super fun. I don't know why this amount actually has disappeared. Let's put this on FM amount. It's all siblings. Boom. Right? And it's essentially like, you could use the XY to kind of do these type of alterations. I just kind of like this linear architecture of just a slider. So what I was doing is I have this chopped break, right? This is what it sounded like before. So this is just straight off of MIDI chopping it. And then now with my alteration, we're going through the hyperdrive right there. And I was like, all right, I just kind of found a spot that I think sounded good. Like right in there, roughly. And then I think what I ended up doing was going into the MIDI transformation tools to just get like something a little bit, just like some kind of cool alteration on it. So it's this middle tab right here, transformation tools, and one of the stock transformations, I've got a bunch of crazy stuff going on in here, but one of the stock ones that ships with Ableton is the chop. I just hit transform and it chopped every single note. I started to get like some really funky sort of granular, like my computer's dying type sounds. But that's super fun. And so now you could just either perform that if you wanted, or right click and then hit show automation. And let's just say that you selected a region, right? Maybe I'll select these first two moments right here and then just kind of hit like some kind of curve and then just duplicate the curve. So yeah, you can get a lot of mileage out of just some nested macros and a little bit of automation, right? And then what I did was I just selected that clip and hit Command B, and just had that in a clip, and then just started kind of editing it from there. But it was such a great launching pad because this was the sample. But yeah, just getting a little bit more like electricity out of it in general. And then yeah, I think at the end, like here, I just messed around with like a little bit of the same ethos, just with some effects. I think really just getting a bunch of samples in there by chopping another longer form sample and then copying the value to siblings just really helps, like, just get a lot of variation in sound really fast. So that's just kind of my general approach. Like when I'm just making a track and I'm quickly just trying to get some life into it and some variation and maybe more of like a momentary like DJ effects style thing going on. I do want to show you more of a generative use case now. So I'll just show you the track briefly. I call it like a kind of like a one button symphony in a way, where you get the drum sampler using an LFO to chop the sample for you and create all this really cool melodic variation. And so I'll just show you real fast. Yep. So, you know, that's pretty much, it just loops from there. But all the melodic stuff that you're hearing in this, like these pads, this is all the drum sampler. So let's turn off some of these elements here. I had one of these was playing, it wasn't supposed to, but it's all good. All of that right there is just the drum sampler doing its thing. So I'll show you real quick kind of how I built it. So you just take a single instance of drum sampler, right? Let's just grab something. I'll go into my own sample packs, shameless plug, and go into the melodic section. Maybe we'll just grab like, I think this is literally the one that I used in this. Cool. So I'll pull it into this blank MIDI track again. Right click, drum sampler. Switch it back to the sampler. Switch it back to the sampler. It's really fun, just back and forth. Super easy. Cool. And so I have this sample. It's not really playing all the way out because I don't have the hold and decay up. But there we go. And now we just literally want this to chop itself and create all of this variation. So what I'm gonna do is pull in an LFO. And I'm gonna switch the LFO to the synced rate and maybe do 1/4. And then I'm now going to map this up here to the start, and then make sure to switch it from mod to remote. Okay, and then now you see it's just kind of moving crazy. And what I like to do is do random, so it just starting in different spots. So you get, this is kind of like the variation aspect of it. And then I take this length down from 100 to maybe, this is like the salt here is where, you know, you can mess with this later on. But in order to get more of like traditional chopping, I kind of just shorten it within like double digits, right? And so here's where it becomes one button. Is now all you have to do is kind of, let's find the pitch that you want it at. You know, maybe we could do C. Let's just do C1. Actually, let's do C2. And then I'm just going to write in a bunch of just random notes here. And we'll turn our volume up. But it's literally chopping the sample for us now, right? It's moving to all these discrete positions. Turn up the attack a little bit, and then it just smooths out some of those clicks. So that's not, necessarily an insane, I think, concept. But where it really starts to shine is messing with the effect suite, because it adds this variation that other samplers can't necessarily add as easily. And so what I was liking to do was like have a fixed grain, and you can see I've kind of like replicated it here, right? Turn the grain down here. I'm going to go into this. You can map more parameters in the LFO by clicking this hamburger menu up in the top right. It looks like a little sheet of paper. And then I'm going to map that to the factor stretch, right? And then also put that on remote. So now the amount is just randomly just kind of going crazy. And now you kind of get this kind of glitchy, warbly, sort of granular vibe. And then, you get more visible, like audible repeats the higher up you go. And then you get a little bit more slimy, granular going in the opposite direction. But you can already see how this is, super useful. And then from here, one thing I like to do is just grab these kind of alterations, like, compress it a little bit, add like a flanger. You just get this really, really nice movement. And, you're not beholden to this rhythm, you could do kind of whatever you want it to do. I'm just gonna pull up and grab that, and then let's make the grid a little bit finer, and then we'll chop the notes hitting Command E. You know what I mean? And then, so don't forget about your ADSR control here too, because this will really kind of start to shape the sound in other ways. Get more percussive with it and really roll it out over time. Your length and your decay end up kind of like doing similar things after a while, because there's not enough time just in between the notes that you've drawn in. So the longer, you'll be able to mess with more of like the decay and like the hold and all that if there's more space in between your notes. But yeah, I love kind of, I think Ivy was mentioning this earlier, where it's like there's a little bit of prep work as far as getting your samples melodically in there first. Like I just already know that these are all in the same key. Sometimes I'm not always trying to look for other things. I'm like, all right, I know that this is an F minor. I don't want to go find another sample. I think that this actually works really well in this use case, because you could just duplicate this, right? And let's just say you created like a lot more space, right? Just do something like this instead. And then now I go into that duplicated one and I just transpose that down an octave or another octave, right? And because it's random, you're getting different motions and different parts of the sample are being chopped, right? But you're filtering it out, so you're kind of getting a little bit more of a symphony of sounds, and it's kind of creating you're just getting more elements out of just this one element, just getting more mileage out of it. And you don't have to keep it on that alteration. Like if you wanted to get more noise, Yep, it's one way I like to use that though. And yeah, I've been finding that like super inspiring to create IDM textures, you don't have to just throw melody in there. You can throw anything in there. And what's really nice is that, you keep duplicating this. You could switch up the sample if you wanted, and just start like throwing in drum loops if you want. It doesn't have to stay the same. Let's see. Sure. And then your MIDI clip or your MIDI just ends up kind of becoming your rhythm and your chop, but you don't have to venture too far. It's like really simple MIDI. You could just get granular with it, do any kind of like stretching, but you have access essentially to this effect suite. But I like to use it like mostly in this melodic context, just because it just adds so much loft and texture to what you're doing. And it's easily stackable when you don't really want to venture outside of using multiple samples. But yeah, these are kind of like my two most fun use cases, I would say, for me right now. Like, just really aiding in the process of like actually getting into making music, where I'm just sitting there and I'm just like, all right, I need something that's inspiring and generative. And you could just save that as a rack and load it up and then just quickly start, subbing stuff in and out and just get you started.
Nice one. One thing I was wondering if either of you, Omari, I don't know if everybody could see the contextual menu when you were right-clicking to like map to siblings, because you're only sharing your one window instead of your whole desktop.
Oh, maybe that's what it was. Okay.
So it looks like magic because you just like instantly do it. But
I see. He's just like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just built like that.
That's okay. Just effortlessly, everything is mapped.
It's mapped to my brain, the Neuralink.
We did have questions about what happens with the LFO, with your trick with the LFO. What happens if you use like a add slew to that random LFO shape where it isn't perfectly square? If the parameter like glides, what that sounds like and what it does.
Yeah, totally. Like, let's see if we could go up to what's one that is kind of active right now. Yeah, we can make it like, yeah, you can see it visually even kind of representing here. And this one actually might be something fun to map to the grain. The macro might just have like, or the factor is, I think, going to be a little bit more subtle in this context, but map to something like the grain, and you might just start to really hear that just a slow decline. Yeah. Yeah, and you can get crazy with that. You can have it only really affecting that upper register if you want, or really make it super noticeable. Get super crazy with the jitter. But yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, the sky's the limit as far as the modulation goes, especially with the LFO. There's so many cool alterations.
Do you build beats differently when you'll perform them live on push versus when you're working at the computer?
When I'm performing live on push, yeah, I can kind of translate that. Yeah, I would say sometimes it can be a consideration for me. I don't know about how it is for you, Ivy. Like certain things that I might like print into like a single clip because I'm like, oh, this swing is like maybe too specific to try to, you could get real gnarly with the swing stuff sometimes. So maybe it's that. But yeah, for the most part, I'm like flattening things or running clips, like discrete clips that where it's all good as long as everything is clocking to the master tempo.
I'm really not any kind of finger drummer, so everything that I am making when I am performing live with Push, I'm usually working with audio, so everything is flattened, and yeah, I definitely don't have the chops to do any kind of live beat performance. Absolutely
Yeah,
not.
the live beat performance, it can get, yeah. I'm like, if you want to hear me build the loop and you're cool with that, live, like, yeah, you want to hear me hit Control Z in real time, then maybe. So,
That's
but yeah,
part of the
short
fun.
answer, I would say is maybe no.
I must be the only one. I love to like fill my drum rack up with melodic samples in addition to all of my drum samples, so that I just play rhythms differently when I'm finger drumming than I would if I was playing two different instruments at once, which for me is a fun thing. Like, for me, I just find creatively when I focus on each sound individually, I can accidentally make all of them too busy and too active and doing too much. And when I am suddenly forced to be too busy and too active and play like the bass line and the drums at the same time, everything just gets naturally simplified in this really like musical way that makes me make more interesting music, I think. But so I like to finger drum.
Yeah, that's dope. It reminds me of this artist, D'Anthony Parks. You ever see
Yeah.
like the techno self stuff where it's just
Yeah.
like it's kind of cool. He just playing with limitation in a really cool way that just makes it really musical.
Yeah. There's a really wonderful video of his performance from Loop in Berlin from a few years ago that's up on the Ableton YouTube channel. If you've never seen D'Anthony Parks do this approach to performance, it's wild and it's worth a watch. What's one drum rack habit every beginner should learn early to improve their workflow long term? Ooh,
That's a great question.
I mean, one thing that I would just throw out there is drum racks let you put any sound anywhere you want. However, if you do learn the kind of common layout that most drum racks have used, it makes it really easy to try out different sounds on the fly. You don't have to be locked into that particular arrangement of where like the kick is always the first pad and then the snare is two pads over to the right and the hi-hat's just above it. But if you do sort of learn those locations, you can create a beat and then swap out your drum rack for a totally different one instantly, and all of the sounds translate to the new drum preset.
Not being afraid of macroing things, and then not being afraid of throwing individual devices before a single cell. So like, like Ivy was doing earlier, if you were here, where you can throw like a velocity before it and it affects what's happening there. I think it took me a while to realize that you could it's like there's all this nesting that's happening that the more that you mess with, the more muscle memory you get with it. Like you can build something really powerful with drum rack.
Yeah, I mean, they can have their own sends and return effects in them. So if you know you like a certain reverb sound with this kit, you can build the reverb into the drum rack so that it's saved in a preset and recalled the next time you load the rack up. It's wild how deep you can get with drum racks.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's an iceberg to it. Like there's a artist and sound designer named User Friendly, and they make some really, really interesting racks for the drum rack, where they've made, they're making all these like internal sequencing. I think Sidebrain might also actually have a video on it too, talking about like how you can kind of sequence effects, even kind of use it as like infiltrator or something. Yeah, it's really mind blowing, the amount of thought that's gone into it.
Heck yeah. Okay.
I think for me, just on that question,
please.
like for me, when I'm building drum racks out of not drum sounds but other samples, and trying to create kind of chopped up, crazy, complex soundscapes, like using choke groups has been really, like I when I first discovered the where choke groups are buried in the ins and outs, and being able to have certain samples cut off other samples just really made it, like the creation process of creating crazy chops, so much faster.
Yeah, you get some more like natural vocabulary too with it. It feels like more alive.
Exactly.
Naturally muting.
Or wildly glitchy and unnatural, where like
Yeah,
everything cuts. It's sort of like linear drumming. Like every sound will cut the previous one off in this funky way. A good question for both of you. What helped you understand groove and rhythm beyond just placing notes on the grid?
Definitely a lot of this is really funny, is that when I first started using Ableton, I'm talking like day zero, didn't know anything. I didn't know how to change the tempo on Ableton. So what I would do was, when I wanted to loop something, I would zoom in and then just bracket it, and then like that would be my loop. But what that did was, it just made me like, I would like play these like short grooves in, try to finger drum them in, whether it was on my laptop keyboard or if I had a MIDI controller, and then I would like just loop those, right? And trying to get some level of physicality into it at some point. Your body has like a natural clock and a natural tempo. I think you'll, when you get an understanding of that kind of like vocabulary that you're naturally expressing, I think things just get more iterative and just stronger in that way, and you start to want to be like, oh, okay, like, also the grid is your best friend. I was so in the pedagogy of like unquantization, coming from the realm of things that I do, where it's like, we're listening to Dilla, Madlib, we're like, oh man, we don't need the grid. And the grid is actually, there to help you. It's like the backboard in basketball, it's like, it's helping you keep that time so you can break the rules. So like, yeah, really pushing timing elements to their extremities and then scaling them back, whether that be like swing, or even messing with tempo, or how many notes you can fit into a single bar, and then take them away. I think those are all valid ways to kind of start exploring different rhythms.
Yeah, I think for me, like the music that I'm making, it's not necessarily always so drum based, I guess. I work a lot with samples, and so for me, finding a groove in an existing sample, especially if it's not specifically a musical sample, if it's a sample of speech or found sound or something, and finding the groove in the loop and then building the rest of my track out of that, is really where I find the groove for most of my tracks. I usually start from that rather than starting from a beat. And that's really what gives me my orientation when I'm building something.
That's so cool.
We have another question in here about a smooth way to translate a simpler instance that has chops in it into a drum rack. Today we've shown a few different things, and in just a minute, Marco Tonni will show you a few more that are kind of hiding in this contextual menu, where you can right-click on like the header for a device, and the pop-up contextual menu lets you do fun things. You can convert a drum sampler into a simpler, and vice versa. You can map multiple parameters all to one macro knob. In Simpler, if you have a simpler that you've already chopped something up in, and you right-click on the waveform itself, it's a little hidden because it's not in the title of the device. If you click on the title of the device, you can convert simpler to sampler or simpler into drum sampler. But if you convert on the chopped up sample itself in a simpler, one of the options there is slice to drum rack, and it takes that break or whatever material that's chopped up in a simpler, and it automatically converts it into a drum rack with an individual version of simpler for every single chop that you had made in that one simpler. And then after you do that, you can also right click on the whole drum rack and convert all of those into instances of drum sampler, so that you can try out all the time stretching and wildness. But it's kind of hiding. You have to right-click on the waveform itself. What do you guys recommend for drum layering?
I mean, there's so many approaches to this. I feel like just, whether you want to use like found sound, whether you literally just want to, I think like from a super conceptual standpoint, literally duplicating the drum loop that you have, and then taking things away or messing with it in some way, just so you can immediately get a sense of what it would feel like to add something new to it, helps. And it gets rid of the barrier of like, what do I add? Just work with what you already have, just get iterative. And, yeah, and then from there, I can kind of start to guide you as to where you're like, oh, okay, well, I know what it's not. It's not a duplication of itself. It's maybe this high pitched sound. Maybe it's, you know, some bird call or something. I think from a technical perspective, though, I do love. I've always loved using the slice function in simpler, just because it just I could just throw in a long sample of whatever, and just I love like the predefined positions, and I'm not looking for that. Feels generative to me, where it's just like I'm not looking to define those traditionally, like, you know, in an MPC style way. I just want to quickly get access to sounds, and I could do that 5 times super fast by just pulling in sounds from the sidebar and then immediately just start stacking things. So it's really about like finding where your convenience is, whether it's like summoning a tool really, really fast. Is it MIDI generation? Is it sound selection? Finding the quickest path to that, I think, is really helpful for layering.
Yeah, and for me, I'm a big fan of a sidechain gate on found sounds, on environmental sounds, anything on like dusty vinyl sounds, on things that are going to add texture to the drums. I think, yeah, bringing in something that's organic is something that is really important in the kind of music that I make, and just gives a little bit more sense of place, I think, to the music. Like, I really love taking samples from places that I've been and bringing that into my music. And so, yeah, a sidechain gate to bring that in over my drum sounds tends to be the approach that I take a lot of the time.
Very cool. On a technical level, one thing that I would shout out really quickly in terms of like layering, for each pad of a drum rack, there is a setting in the chain selector, the chain view, where you can literally select what MIDI note triggers that chain. And the default is that every pad has its own note assigned to it, but they don't have to. So if you really wanted to start stacking drum sounds, you can have multiple different samples on multiple different pads in a drum rack that all receive the same note, so that when you play them, it triggers all those samples at once. And then you have multiple sounds all playing at the same time, but because they're each on a separate pad, you can affect an EQ and like shape their sound individually while triggering them all together. So kind of a nice workflow to be able to just add a lot of additional sounds on top of what you're working with and still have the control to like EQ them and shape them together. Do you start with some sort of phrase or sound, or do you start with the drums first?
I oscillate back and forth so much between like melody and sound, but it is interesting. Like I think like, yeah, there's just so many different ways to pull from. Kind of like what Ivy was saying. Sometimes I'll hear like a rhythm inside of something that I feel like, oh, I need to extract that, and then or trace it. And then other times it's coming from the heart. Other times it's coming from the inside. Just like, you know, literally, I'm just like, oh, I've just had this in mind. But I think these days I'm just messing with I'm in a very melodic side of life right now, and I think as far as the hardware I'm even collecting, like there's some sort of generative aspect. Like I like little semi-modular pieces that, you know, generate notes quickly, and I'm like, oh cool, I can now put brackets on that. I like starting with things I could put brackets around than necessarily needing to be like, all right, I need to have like a Queen moment, go sit down at the piano and just crumple up a piece of paper. That's not it. Like it's just like it's more generative, and tell me something that I can just be like, no, not that. Like I'm just watching somebody paint a house, and then I'll come in and do it myself after a while. So
I like this idea that generative tools help you even if you throw all the ideas that they generate away. Like I love this idea that you have to sort of like try out a certain number of things and discard them before you get to the things you like. So there's this funny idea that maybe you could like sit there and listen to a few generative ideas and then be like, okay, all of that's garbage, but what I want to do is this now, and now yeah. I know, and I didn't know 15 minutes earlier.
Yeah, and for me, in my process, like I was talking about before, usually I'm starting with some kind of a loop. I might have warped or chopped or mangled a sample or a sound in some way. Often that sound doesn't even make it to the end of the session, but it's the seed or the thing that started the process. And I'm always kind of trying to find my way through a sound. Where is it leading me? What does it need next? It always seems like it's a very I don't necessarily start producing with an idea in mind or a destination in mind. It's always just like, okay, what is this? This sound had something in it that made me want to work with it. What is it telling me that it needs next? And so I'm just sort of following my instinct. And then sometimes I've thrown so much stuff into my session, by the time I'm finishing, the thing that I originally started with is no longer necessary, or it's been replaced by something else, or it's no longer the point. I've gone off in another direction. But it's always starting, with a sound and trying to like draw something out of it. And I think that solves the kind of the blank piece of paper or the blank session problem. Is the second that I'm starting with a sound or a sample, that is a problem that I have to solve. And that's been one of the most kind of productive approaches to making music for me, is not starting necessarily out with like a deep-seated sense that I have something to say and I need to say it. Because if I waited for the moment when I have something really profound to say, I would never make any music at all. So instead it's like, oh, here's a sound. What can I do with the sound? What intrigues me about the sound? Where is it taking me? And yeah, that's usually, it might be a rhythm, it might be mental sound, it might be a loop from someone else, it might be something from like freesounds.org. It's one of my favorite places, because it's really collaborative and it's really community based. And so like working also in a sense of working with other humans who have made sounds and contributed them to a community, I think is a big part of my process. My process is very rooted in community and collaborative music making, community music making. So finding sounds from other people that inspire me, that have generated something to give to the community, that for me feels also like being in conversation with other music makers, and that's fills me with a lot of joy. So that's kind of where I start.
So let's take a little break on questions and hear from Marco.
Hey there, this is Marco from Ableton Sound Team, and today I'll talk to you about Drum Sampler. The Drum Sampler device is our cross-product sample player for beatmaking, and its natural habitat is inside drum racks. Its goal is to provide a super straightforward and playful interface for playing and manipulating beats. It works in live, on Move, and Note. Whereas Simpler supports several different use cases, from playing samples melodically to slicing, Drum Sampler's focus is sharper, tailored around one specific purpose, which allows also to focus sharply its parameter space. In a way, to be able to do more with less. Today, I wanted to show you a few of my favorite tricks, including a deeper look to its playback effects, which are the highlight of this package. For starters, when doing Drum Sampler, we have improved the workflow of building racks with it. Let me show you a couple of hidden things you might not be aware of. First of all, you can drop an empty drum sampler into a drum rack, and with the right click, hit Save Default Pad. Doing this means that by now, every time you drop a new sample on a drum rack, Drum Sampler, not Simpler, will be used instead. Let me browse for some one-shots and show you another great workflow improvement that makes creating drum kits really, really fast. So now I'll be using the computer keyboard to trigger a specific pad, and you can see they get selected down here. When I do that, I can pick any kick drum and hit enter, and it will be loaded automatically in the selected drum pad, which means now I can go snare, choose a hi-hat, I'll put it in the usual spot where hi-hats are. And once I find one that I like, there. This is a really, really quick workflow that lets you build in seconds a drum rack and knowing exactly where you're going to drop the samples that you have just preheard. Another important thing is that anytime you can convert a drum sampler to Simpler or vice versa. Obviously, the two devices are quite different, but the most fundamental traits will always be converted: start, length, and pitch, for example. By the way, this also works for entire drum racks. So you can convert a full drum rack back and forth from simpler to drum sampler. But now let's look to some more device-specific aspects. For starters, I like to talk a bit about the filter section. It might have occurred to you that drum sampler filter section is a bit unusual. We don't spot all the typical filter types we have seen in other Ableton devices. Also here, we try to limit the selection to things that make a lot of sense in the case of one-shot samples. So first of all, what's great here is that having both a two-pole and one-pole filter means you can really decide how much to retain in terms of frequency when you're filtering things. Check the difference. So this is super nice because with the one-pole filter, I can filter high frequencies, but still retain a lot of the melody. Whereas with the two-pole filters, I would really only hear the bass and the low end. This works wonders also on snares and hi-hats to soften them up. I also really love that we have a peak filter, which means I can really use it as a sort of an echo to thicken up stuff, like I will do in this case with the rim shot. Yes, I really like that. All right, let's talk a bit about modulation in drum sampler. Modulation is pretty simple in this device. You can either use velocity or slide and pick what is the destination for your modulation. There is also a fixed velocity to volume modulation, which is by default entered already on all the paths. So let me try to use attack modulation instead than velocity modulation to create a more natural flow in how the kick drum and a few other sounds happen. So let's check the difference. Now remove velocity to modulation completely, dial in some attack. And now I'll do the same on the hi-hat. Remove velocity to volume, dial in some attack. Very nice. Let's look at a few of the playback effects now. First of all, let's start with time stretch, which is the default effects, and also my favorite. One natural use case is to introduce variation and actually mayhem in something like a hi-hat pattern. By moving the XY pad, in fact, you can control both the time stretch factor and the grain size, which can lead to pretty adventurous modulation. Let's check this out. A more basic use case, which I really like for time stretching, is to create a sort of a delay and introduce shuffle in a simple hi-hat pattern. Let's check this out. All right, let's look at a couple more playback effects. First of all, let's beef up a bit this snare. Using punch, I can basically fake the effect of a compressor. What happens is, when I dial in a mount, the level will go down right after the transient and recover over time, depending on the release parameter. Another great effect is the sub oscillator. I can actually beef up my kick drums, adding harmonics, low-end harmonics, which is pretty cool. Instead of the sub-oscillator, I can also use noise to do the same. And rather than adding a sub-oscillator, add a sort of a high frequency, something like a layering a hi-hat or snare to it. The length of the noise, the same applies to the sub-oscillator by the way, will be determined exclusively by the decay parameter. So you can still use hold to play back the entire sample, but have a short decay to have just a short burst of noise. In this last bit, I will also use a few of the playback effects to introduce some fine-tuning for this basic pattern. Let's see if I can get it to sound better. I will duplicate it so we can go back to the original one and compare later on. First of all, I will use the one-pole filter I showed you before to warm up this kick. Second, I will use the pitch envelope to make this hi-hat a little less boring. Let me also use velocity modulation so that the amount of pitch envelope will change depending on the velocity of the hits. Next, I want to use some punch on the snare so that it will glue better with the rest of the beat. Finally, we do have an 8-bit mode, which also comes with a filter envelope. So let's use that on my guitar chord. First of all, I can reduce the sample rate, making it sound a bit crushed. Then I can start to dial in the decay negatively, so to shorten the filter envelope and chop it up a bit. Nice. Now let's compare it to what it was before. And where I got. That's pretty cool, with a few tweaks. And without using any other effects, I managed to change the sound in a way to make it mine. Well, this is a bit just scratching the surface, but hopefully it gave you an idea about how to make a sound of a drum kit yours and find your own style and experiment with it. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Amazing.
I should also mention one last thing I forgot is for anyone who is Flinter, so that's a German acronym for any marginalized genders, women, lesbian, intersex, trans, non-binary, etc. I'm also running an online week-long residency. Depending on what time zone you're in, it's basically an opportunity to spend a week with a group of other musicians working, making stuff, trying to finish stuff. It's trying to get people finishing stuff. So if anyone here is interested in that event, you can attend on Zoom from anywhere in the world. Again, time zone permitting. So I've just dropped that in the chat as well.
Thank you.
Incredible.
Cool. Well, thank both of you for sharing your insights. I've learned wonderful stuff today. So I'm going to go make some tunes.